But before we get to our two great guests, I want to make the point, as clearly as I can, that Joe Biden and Antony Blinken have blood on their hands. I mean, they are drenched in blood. Now, what am I talking about? Can anybody tell me of any other president in American history who gives aid and support, billions of dollars, to our enemy who has killed American soldiers in Iraq, to our enemy that has created all kinds of mayhem in the Middle East, to our enemy who's now attacking our armed forces in the Middle East and attacking our allies, that's trying to build an Islamic caliphate throughout the Middle East? What kind of a commander-in-chief of the United States of America waives economic sanctions, whether it's oil, commerce, finance, banking, you name it, against a regime that sought to assassinate our former Secretary of State and our former National Security Advisor? Who the hell does that? Can you name a single president in American history, a single Secretary of State, since we've had Secretary of States? Go back to Jefferson. Can you name one who would ever arm our enemy? I have another question. What kind of president, what kind of a Secretary of State would appoint an individual who is pro-Iran, who is a Marxist, who is a special pleader for Iran, to negotiate a nuclear deal on our behalf against that regime, and then in turn would hire 3 staffers, one of whom is a potential spy for that regime, and that envoy had his classification yanked and is under investigation, and the information is being kept from the United States Congress? What kind of a president of the United States and Secretary of State appoints such a reprobate to represent the United States? What kind of a president of the United States and Secretary of State refuses to trigger what's called snapback a few weeks ago to prevent Iran from being able to make, buy, and sell missiles? That's happened too. What kind of a president of the United States and Secretary of State arm our terrorist enemies, arm Hamas? Donald Trump said no more money through the UN, UNRWA, to Hamas, which the UN won't even call a terrorist state, won't even call a terrorist group, so they continue to get money. Trump cut it off. Biden and Blinken, the money's pouring in again. What kind of a president of the United States and Secretary of State fund Arafat's PLO with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars with no conditions whatsoever, and refuse to enforce the Taylor Force Act, which tells the Palestinians you don't get any money from the United States unless you stop killing Israelis, killing Americans, for which you give pensions. It's called slay for pay to the terrorist families. So what do we have here in Biden and Blinken? Then, what do they do in turn? They tell the Israelis, look, we want the hostages out. They take no responsibility for the hostages. They just paid that regime, the Iranian regime, $6 billion for hostages. Oh, and by the way, we don't really want you to win the war. We prefer a stalemate, maybe a ceasefire here and there, maybe a permanent ceasefire. Hamas isn't going to honor a ceasefire. They're a terrorist organization. They don't honor anything. And they even said, this is a dry run, October 7th. We're going to keep at this until we get what we want, the obliteration of the Jews and the Jewish state. So a ceasefire is a surrender. Oh, and what else? Keep sending fuel and medicine and food in there. We now actually have Palestinian citizens telling Al Jazeera, Hamas is stealing everything. They're taking everything. Well, who's the referee in Gaza to make sure they don't? There aren't any. And this administration keeps putting the pressure on Israel to capitulate, to be nice about the war, to make sure you don't really defeat the enemy, just kind of box them in. In other words, Blinken and Biden take no responsibility for what they unleashed in the Middle East, where we had the Abraham Accords, where we had peace breaking out between Arab and Muslim countries and the Israelis, where the Iranians were in a box. In fact, they were collapsing. The people were rising up, where Hamas was in a box, where Hezbollah was in a box. They were all in a box. until Biden and Blinken come in and unleash the whole damn thing. And now it's Israel's fault. Israel's attacked on October 7 in horrendous ways that we don't need to keep describing, and now Israel's considered the aggressor. You have this Marxist fraud, Bernie Sanders in the Senate saying, well, they should not get any funds, or we need a condition of funds. Israel must do that and that. And then finally, a two-state solution. While this war is going on, this two-state solution that's pushed by Thomas Friedman at the New York Times, another Israel hater, that's pushed by the Democrat Party, that was pushed by Obama, is pushed by everybody. There was a two-state solution. It was called Gaza. Look what happened. But as I've said here before, the two-state solution for Israel is the final solution. Why? Because you need to understand what the Islamists want. It's a caliphate. It's not a two-state solution. Iran has a state. Are they satisfied with their state? They've all but taken over Lebanon. They've all but taken over Yemen. They're in the middle of taking over Iraq. They've all but taken over the Gaza Strip. They want a caliphate. And not just in the Middle East. They're building nuclear weapons, or the effort to build nuclear weapons. That's not for their neighborhood. That's for our neighborhood. And what are we doing to stop them right now? What is the plan? What is the strategy to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon right now? On Biden and Blinken's watch, there's nothing to stop them, which is why they're racing to the finish line, because they know they have friends in the United States State Department. And they know that as in the 1930s and 40s, the Israelis have many anti-Semites in the State Department, and many of them are still there. I want to turn to our friend and a man who really knows these subjects inside and out, Congressman Michael Waltz, a combat veteran, a man who has been ringing the bell and banging the pots and pans for a long time about the Middle East and elsewhere, and we'll get into that too. Michael Waltz, what is wrong with what I just said?
There's all kinds of things wrong with the world. What you just said is absolutely right. And, Mark, let's just go back and look at the world that President Trump inherited, the Middle East that he inherited, with ISIS on the march, Iran on the march. It was a total mess. And within just a few years, he had taken out Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. He had taken out Soleimani, the leader of Iran's IRGC. The Iranian currency was tanking. Oil had gone from 4 million barrels a day to basically nothing. Their foreign currency reserves were tanking. You're absolutely right. He had it contained. We went from ISIS destroyed, Iran broke, and then the Abraham Accords to back where we are today. And two things that I would add. One, the same team that's around Biden was around Obama. Blinken, Sullivan, his deputy Feiner, all of them were all deputies and acolytes of Susan Rice, John Kerry, and Hillary Clinton. And so you've had this same policy basically since 2008, because even when Trump was in, they tried to undermine him. And then the only other thing I would add is Afghanistan. We now have an axis of terror from Kabul on a superhighway all the way through Tehran. They have completely, despite all our blood and treasure in Iraq, have turned Iraq into a client state of Iran, all the way to the Mediterranean, through Syria and through Lebanon, and have surrounded Israel with the ring of fire the Ayatollah has always complained about. And then now you have the Houthis down in Yemen that Biden on week one of his administration delisted as a terror organization, attacking international shipping. About 15 to 20% of global trade passes through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So this is a calamity and a disaster of global proportions. And yet you have a crew around Biden, because I don't think he's really in charge, that has a fundamental misunderstanding of deterrence. Every time you see them go to the microphone and say, our main goal is to prevent escalation, the Ayatollahs see that as an invite to continue escalation. Sometimes, Mark, when the bully's in the schoolyard, you can't just keep giving them more and more lunch money. You got to punch them in the nose. And until we hit Iran, which is behind all of this, where it counts, That's not an invasion. Don't want the media freaking out. That's cyber. That's financial. That's all kinds of, we have all kinds of things in the toolkit. But until you hit them where it counts like President Trump did, this is going to continue and it's going to get worse.
Michael Waltz, I will ask you this question. You're a man who has studied military history. You're a man who has lived combat. You're a congressman from Florida. Can you think of another president of the United States who would take steps to directly or indirectly arm our enemy that's trying to build a nuclear weapon that would be aimed at the United States, arm an enemy that has killed American soldiers with IEDs and so forth, arm an enemy that is trying to build a caliphate throughout the Middle East, that has taken American hostages, that is funding Hamas and what Hamas is doing to our ally Israel? This isn't even passivity. This is affirmative action that is taken, that we know today is building up Iran. And in the face of all this, there's no recalculation. There's no change in course. Can you tell me another president of the United States who has done something like this?
I can't think of one. The closest I'd think of is Neville Chamberlain in the 1930s that thought he could appease his way out of Hitler's aggressions. And that's why this is, we need to wake up to how dangerous this course we are on truly is. And the thing that has me so frustrated is I guess, I don't know what it's going to take for them to change course. I guess we're going to have a ship get sunk by these sophisticated anti-ship missiles that the Houthis are firing, or service members die. And I was just in a briefing with some of the generals. Some of the drones, some of the rockets have gotten through our defenses. By the grace of God, they missed, but eventually they're not going to miss, and Iran is going to continue to fire them until they get a catastrophic hit. I don't know what else it's going to take to get these guys around Biden to walk away from this fantasy of appeasement and this fantasy of a nuclear deal that they keep trying to look away from, and don't rattle Iran's cage because they think we can get back into it. It's just not the case.
There's not another president in American history that has done or would do what Biden is doing. You don't arm your enemy. That's number one. And number two, the only difference I see, which is a big one with Neville Chamberlain and Joe Biden, is Neville Chamberlain wasn't funding the Nazis. Joe Biden is funding the Islamo-Nazi regime in Iran.